And thanks for joining us here on PM Express. And there's a big conversation happening in the SAP region, the breakup of ECOWAS. And tonight, let's explore its implications for SAP regional integration and security. Now, we start tonight with one of the key, very important issues when it comes to which countries is it that we are talking about when it comes to the breakup. Niger, Mali, and Burkina Faso, as you see on the screen. They've decided that they will break away from ECOWAS and come together and form their own bloc. In fact, that conversation has been mooted and is actively being had. My guests will join us to see if this really goes anywhere. It's just a case of just flexing muzzles to get something from ECOWAS, or they really mean to actually break away and form a three-nation bloc within the SAP region. That'll be very fascinating indeed, and my guests will give me their thoughts on this particular subject. But there's a very important issue that we need to explore when we are talking about possible implications and effects on the SAP region. Trade is important. One of the reasons why ECOWAS is so important is that it was supposed, at least in theory, to aid easy movement of goods and services and facilitate international trade between these countries within the SAP region. That's why it's so important, right? So if you take away these three countries, then that obviously becomes a challenge, considering our trading relationship with these countries. And so we've isolated these three countries to sort of see where we are when it comes to our trade with them, and see if indeed they go ahead with this threat and this becomes a permanent feature, how will this affect us? And if you look at this, isolating the first case of Burkina Faso, you see that our balance of trade relationship is a pretty healthy one. Because on the average, Burkina Faso imports $233.45 million more than Ghana in bilateral trade. And in other words, we are exporting far more to them than they are in terms of their exports to us, right? So that clearly is a relationship that is healthy in our favor when it comes to the country of Burkina Faso. And then you go to the next country that we isolated to watch, Niger. Same story, not as huge as Burkina Faso. But again, you see 57.89 million in terms of the average Niger imports. More, right, in bilateral trade with Ghana. And Ghana, it's again, they're doing quite significantly in terms of, you know, the amount of goods and services that we send in there. But of course, this is understandable. Landlord countries as they are. And so you expect that will be something that will play out. And we see the same thing with the imports when it comes to Mali's imports, 130 million more in bilateral trade with Ghana. So in all cases, Ghana is in a very healthy position, right? But there are some specific products, and in this case, onion in particular, that will lead to some struggles for us. Because if you look at what we are calling the onion dependency, it tells its own story, right? Because if you look at it, average onion imports between 2013 and 2021, according to the OEC, is around 11.74 million. And this is a case for the three countries. We import a significant amount of onion there, and that amount is significant indeed for our country. Average onion imports from Niger is 9.45 million. And an average percentage of dependency over that period between 2013 and 2021, 77.18%. So that is significant, 77.18%. What obviously will mean is onion prices will go up as a result of what has happened, because it's going to be difficult to bring the onions from there. Prices will go up as a result of that because transportation will be affected, etc., etc. So that is clearly one of the areas that will be affected. And then you talk about the case of security, this implications. And I have guests who will look into this, so I'm not really going to go into that a bit. But we know that Russia is quite determined to bring all these three countries under its sphere of influence. And it's possibly becoming the theater where this global tussle between Russia and the West is going to be playing out. That is a key thing to watch. And how this affects our security is important also. Because of that context that we're seeing, particularly over Ukraine, that has pitched the West firmly against Russia. Possibly we've seen the Wagner influence in that SAP region. That is something that my guests will expand on when we sit for a conversation. And then you have the question about that age-old. We've been talking about this for quite a while. The ECOWAS single currency. Now that you have the three countries say they are breaking away, that is definitely going to affect the timelines, at least, if it doesn't kill it. Because if you look at it, it was scheduled to be launched in 2027, right? After initial plans were derailed, and it's been derailed for quite a while. COVID was the latest to derail it, but we've been trying to meet that convergence criteria for a while for the ECO to come into play. It hasn't happened. And as you know, it was agreed upon by all 15 ECOWAS member states. But as we know now, the three have withdrawn. How will this affect it? Definitely is going to be a challenge. So the single currency is one that definitely stands to suffer as a result of this. I'm going to take a break. When I return, my guests will get into the conversation. Professor Kwesi Aning is a security consultant, is in risk assessment, and I'm delighted that he can join me. I haven't talked to him this year, so I'm going to wish him a happy new year when we sit down to talk. Yao Louise Afful is international trade practitioner and group executive director at APN Group of Organizations, and I'm happy that we can talk to him too. Zaid Mahu is the national president of the Ghana Borderless Alliance. We'll also have a conversation with us. And of course, you know him, the former deputy foreign affairs minister, Emmanuel Bombande. He's been watching this space very closely. And I'm really delighted the quality of individuals who are joining us tonight for this conversation. I'm willing to hear, listen, and learn after this. Thank you very much for joining us here on PM Express. It's a packed conversation, and there's something happening in the sub-region that requires that we pay attention to it. And I wonder if ECOWAS itself has brushed it aside or deserves a bit more focus. My guests will help us navigate this and its impact on us. I'm delighted to be joined by Professor Kwesi Aning. He is, as you know, a good friend of this particular show, and I'm delighted that he can join us for this conversation. He is a security consultant in risk assessment, and he would share his thoughts on the security implications of what is happening in the sub-region with the breaking away of the three countries. We also have Yao Louise Afful. He is the international trade practitioner and group executive director at APN Group of Organizations. And we have Emmanuel Bombande. He is a former deputy foreign affairs minister and a senior mediator's advisor, and also joins us for a conversation on this matter. Ziad Hamoui also joins us. He's a national president of the Ghana Borderless Alliance, and he is with us for a conversation. And I want to start first with you, Emmanuel Bombande, as you watch this unfold. And I know you've been traveling around the world, so you have your ear on the ground. When the three countries say that they are breaking away, do you get a sense that this is something that they genuinely mean? And in terms of going forward, coming together to form your own bloc within the sub-region, or it is a tactic to get something out of ECOWAS?
Thank you so much, Evans, and good evening. I greet my good name, my co-panelists, Zaid and Louise Afful. Let me say up front, they genuinely mean to break away, but there is a caveat. With good preventive diplomacy and dialogue, those intentions can be reversed. But I want to go back and stress that it's a genuine intention because we saw it coming, and the attitude of the rest of West Africa, particularly the coastal states, was to innovate what we were trying to bring into place, the initiatives that will halt the spread of terrorism from coming southward, which implicitly means as long as terrorism stayed in the Sahelian states, it was okay, but it shouldn't come down. And I think those strategies were fundamentally flawed. And I think that is the genesis of the type of conversation amongst the Sahelian states that basically started to say, let us see one another as people whose destiny must be taken by us because our counterparts in West Africa are abandoning us. The only difference is that such intentions could not be expressed as they are now being expressed under the former constitutional regimes we had in Burkina Faso, Niger, and Mali. I think that a lot has to do with the fact that the military takeovers and the military leaders see themselves in synchrony with this sense of abandonment and this sense of solidarity amongst them. And so the quick summary for me is, rather than the whole of the solidarity of a collective security for all of us in West Africa, we started to look at that collective security to be more important for us in the coastal states than for the Sahelian states. And we are now seeing the disintegration of that, in addition to the other factors, which I'm sure we will be talking about.
Professor Aini, what's your assessment of the biggest threat to the rest of the SAP region with this decision that has been taken by the three countries?
Well, the biggest threat to us, to the remaining ECOWAS states, is a lack of understanding of the shifting forces within the sub-region, the expectations of their own people, and the fact that we are still playing constitutional games with the rules and regulations governing elections. Let me make this point very clear. The three states have decided to move away, and they will move away, and they will be successful. Mauritania left ECOWAS as a single state, much poorer than any of these three, around 1980, and it has survived. As my good name Bombande is saying, the coastal states of ECOWAS were more willing to listen to their masters from outside the sub-region and listen to the bogus analysis from elsewhere that the terrorists were coming. Coming from where? That gave a sense that we did not care about these Sahel states. So after their decision to leave, the multinational joint task force has collapsed. The J5 Sahel is going to collapse. And I think the Burkinabe leader a couple of days ago made a powerful statement about Ghana's accusations that the Wagner Group was there, meaning that mistrust played a very critical role. We are dancing around the fire with a constitutional coup in Senegal. Dependent on the person who takes over, that person will join the Federation of Sahel States. So the threat that we are facing, the threats are not coming from the outside. They are internal. And it is based on the conflation of these internal threats with just very few external challenges. That is what is bringing us to our knees. Unfortunately, very quickly, the original communique from ECOWAS was not only tame, but absolutely disgraceful. Paragraph 1 was a very fuzzy, no-sense statement. Paragraph 2 was blaming everybody else in Senegal, apart from the individual and his cohorts, undermining the constitution. Paragraph 3 then went ahead to be full of praise for President Macky Sall for doing what he is expected to do. What? Doing a constitutional coup? Kicking out the opposition from parliament? Invading it with the military? No. So we are failing ourselves in looking into the mirror and saying, what do we see? What are the problems that confront us that we need to sit down, grab it, and deal with it? That failure must be located squarely within ECOWAS.
And Prof, do I hear you say that not only will the three countries succeed, but it's possible that they will attract other members within ECOWAS who will also break away and join, and what I call the coup alliance?
Yes.
I see. That's pretty disturbing. And I want to bring in my other panelists. Yawafo, you are within the trade circles. When you hear Prof render that chilling analysis, what's your reaction? What's your immediate reaction to that?
Well, let me say good evening to you, viewers, and my co-panelists. A little brief on the security. One important thing we need to know is that They are leaving ECOWAS, but they are not leaving the monetary zone. ECOWAS can sanction them, but in terms of monetary, they have not been sanctioned by UEMOA. That is the first point. This tells us that there is a need to take out private businesses, private sector and business out of politics. It should look like the way we have FIFA say, stay out of politics. That's football, stay out of politics. Now, a very significant issue is that look at the three countries that are out. Look at their geopositions, their geographical positions. Their geographical positions is so strategic that they know that they can depend upon themselves when it comes to, in terms of movement of goods and persons. Remember.
But they are landlocked. So how do they do that?
Yes, they are landlocked, but they are not far apart from each other. They are just within a certain, they are enclosed within a certain borders. Now, they are depending upon Russia, as you made earlier. But remember, Russia does not give money. They don't fund. So a critical area that we have to look at here is that if you look at their export and import positions, they produce basically agricultural products, fishing, and what have you. So they critically need to really be part of the ECOWAS development integration. It means that they cannot survive for a very long time when it comes to dependency, especially in the interim that we have ASCFTA. And so for the moment, they will not feel the pinch. They are going to have an issue of consumer variety. And that consumer variety whereby they're not going to have variety of goods, because when we're doing intertrade, you could see a lot of products being within among member countries. And that is going to bring shortages and prices, increases and hikes. When this happens, it also leads to another kind of difficulties and suppression of the citizens. And I call it another counter. So these playbacks is just temporary for them. But in the near coming future, whereby if ECOWAS is to bite more, you're going to see serious hikes in prices, and it's going to be very difficult for them to contain.
You mean ultimately, economically, these three countries will struggle in the end? Is that your analysis?
They're going to struggle in the end because if you look at their import and export parities, they don't have enough value addition. They don't have enough bargain. They depend many more on other ECOWAS members in terms of the export-import. And they are currently looking at thanking Russia, but for how long? And so it is important for us to clarify that. Yes, for now, it's going to be a bit like a kind of honeymoon, but coming weeks, not even 2 months,
it will catch up.
As I'm speaking to you, in Mali, they only receive electricity for only 6 hours a day. They started biting. They are struggling with electricity 6 hours a day, and that's it. And prices are hiking up. That is just one example. I know many will come as we continue.
Yeah, that's interesting. Zia, do you agree with that assessment? You are with the Ghana Borderless Alliance. You agree with that assessment?
Good evening to you and to all. Let me first of all mention first of all that Borderless Alliance is more focused on trade, and that this issue is equally about trade as it is about politics and security.
Yeah.
Remember that trade and economics are inextricably tied into politics and security. You can't have trade without security, and then you don't have security without defense. Coming back to your question, well, I'm sorry to say I don't really agree with Louis Apple's assessment, but initial assessment, he later on self-corrected actually, because you can't be in a more powerful negotiating position and then you find yourself weaker collectively. That means that you are on a weaker position. And I particularly strongly disagree with Dr. Kwesi's assessment of the role of the coastal countries. I think that one of the issues that have dogged ECOWAS was the overemphasis on politics, especially the dynamics with the former colonial powers in the country. Remember that the three Sahelian countries all have strong relationship with France, and currently the anti-French sentiment is running very high along the Sahel, all the way into Central Africa because of a perception of some issues somewhere and challenges. This is affecting the ECOWAS dynamics. So ECOWAS, which is setting its eye next year on the 50th year of independence as a region, is currently blocked by these disintegrations, basically. And remember that these three disintegrations are not the only ones that happened. Before we remember that in 2021, Guinea was the first to have the coup. And coincidentally, also, Guinea is a French country. So there are these dynamics not only between the main ECOWAS countries themselves, but also between these countries and their affiliated former colonial powers. So that is one thing. The second thing is that I also believe that ECOWAS has focused too much on politics and on security at the disadvantage of economics. Remember that most of the problems that have led to the disenfranchisement of some of these states have roots in economic cause. And ECOWAS itself was founded as an economic community of West African states. So I believe that ECOWAS did not focus enough and adequately on the economic component of the socio-political dynamics that have led eventually, unfortunately, to these three countries leaving. Now, these countries are rich countries, but their people are not rich. So there are so many complicated dynamics that have led to them to get disenfranchised from the point of being regionally integrated. So what's the point of associating yourself with 13 or 12 other countries if you are not seeing the benefits and reflecting into your economic development as a country, as people? And so you see that they are justified in a way from their perspective in taking the decision to walk out. And the walking out did not come all of a sudden. Remember that I think a couple of years ago, it was last year, when the three countries came up and signed the Liptako Government Agreement. Yeah. Mali, Burkina, and Niger have signed that a couple of years ago. So it comes to no surprise that these countries have decided finally, maybe perhaps Louis is right in the fact that they might have been persuaded more easily by other powers. Wagner's footprints across West Africa are unmistakable. Whether they are the ones who are actually pushing, or whether it was already set in motion before that, and they just came and landed on plateau. But what matters for us is that this regional integration foundation is being eroded as we sit. The normal integration and flows of trades across West Africa, which is supposed to fuel economic transformation, especially for the landlocked countries, is broken, to the detriment of the landlocked countries, because they will still depend on the coastal countries to have their normal trade. We've seen the statistics from your team earlier on. They depend on the corridors from the coastal countries for import, but also for export. So what's the next move? It really depends on who is calling the shots behind this the recent decision, which is a very unfortunate decision.
Yeah, I mean, and Professor Enin, you make the point about, yes, they will succeed as a bloc and they may attract others in. But if you look at the trade analysis, though, going forward, and their dependence on the countries along the coast, though, in the long term, wouldn't this be injurious to the masses, the people in these countries? Because the leaders will find a way to survive. And the rest of ECOWAS can stifle them back to compliance, can they not?
No, look, let me clarify a couple of falsehoods. One, ECOWAS does not and cannot bite. That's number one. Number two, these three countries are not necessarily thinking Russia. These are geopolitical games and geostrategic games. Russia, China are interested in these countries also, because they provide a basis for spreading their spheres of influence. Let's not forget that Niger alone has 1,200 kilometers of the critical new EU gas oil pipeline that is going to feed through Algeria to Europe. Niger has the uranium. It has something to negotiate. Number three, Morocco and Algeria are already making moves to provide access to ports, granted that they are long distances. Okay? So we would also be losing some amount of money from the transit trade. We would need to pay higher prices for onions, blah, blah. I mean, trade is not my... The question about electricity. Nigeria almost has no electricity. We ourselves are experiencing the reemergence of doomsday. Okay? So we should not look at tiny bits of the big problem and draw conclusions. As my name said, ECOWAS failed to be an integration institution for all when there was a time of crisis. And I think this fallacious argument that ECOWAS was established to be an economic integration organization and now they are taking on security is absolutely false. There is a three-word statement in the original treaty and any other matter that arises. Security is that matter that has arisen and is leading ECOWAS to focus on the insecurity. What were we expecting ECOWAS to do when Liberia collapsed, Sierra Leone, Guinea, La Côte d'Ivoire, Guinea-Bissau? Those were successes. Question, how does ECOWAS learn from its successes and as a supranational institute be able to crack the whip? There are two epochs in ECOWAS's history where leadership and knowledge-based leadership led to a powerful ECOWAS. One was when the current Speaker of the Sierra Leonean Parliament, Dr. Abbas Bundu, was the executive secretary. The second was when Dr. Chambers was the president. And my name has said dialogue and preventive diplomacy. We don't seem to be seeing that now. We need proactive intervention. Look, a more coherent, larger ECOWAS is good for all of us. But to be able to get it working, we've got to have informed leadership, critical thinking, and an ability to apply the rules consistently across the board. Okay, ECOWAS's failure are not about perceptions. It is the reality. Okay, the reality is that it makes bombastic statements that it is unable to fulfill. In December last year, at the ECOWAS meeting in Abuja, a heads of states committee was established to begin the process of negotiation with these three countries. It never even flew out of Abuja. President Tinubu characterized the AES then as a paradox. ECOWAS has consistently misread the signals about what is happening on the sub-region. And that misreading has informed the decisions of the heads of states. And that misinformation leading to decision-making, we saw it even when we were meeting in Accra, and the intelligence chiefs were there, that the coup took place in Burkina. We've got to call a spade a spade. We can only begin the process of repositioning ourselves when we confront our own failures. We are failing, and that is becoming a hallmark.
Emmanuel Bombande, so the three countries broke away. Isn't that really a reflection on the country's own failings? Or is it more about the failings of ECOWAS? I mean, they blame ECOWAS for their breakaway, but this is something they've always wanted to do, right?
No. So, Evans, let's go back to the basics. And my good name has been very forceful in presenting the argument. So, we take the name ECOWAS. It is the Economic Community of West African States. ECOWAS is supposed to be a multilateral institution of us as a people, community. What has happened over the years, and I'm happy my good name pointed to the successes. But rather than build on that, ECOWAS has been taken over by the authority or leadership of ECOWAS, forgetting that our successes was heavily reliant on the people. And that's why you cannot disconnect the policy decisions which are political for integration, including trade. Secondly, Louis Afol, you shouldn't be shocked to hear that the alliance of Sahelian states collectively are going to withdraw from UMOA. And the Burkinabe leader hinted that already, to form their own currency. Why? Because they have nothing to lose. They have nothing to lose. So what would they have to get to stay in UMOA? And that is why the critical thinking demands that it is your policy orientation politically with security as an absolute priority that makes your integration and your trade and your commerce to strive. Where do you find that example? It was when we understood that we needed to have a free movement of goods and people, that trade would then increase. But how was that decision made? It was a political decision to help advance private sector trade and commerce. So you can never have private sector on its own thriving without political leadership. So the very important point we should emphasize is that political leadership has failed. And because of that, the alliance of Sahelian states have nothing to lose. The other point I want to make quickly, all of us on this platform, go back to Upper Volta as we knew it. They're poor. But Thomas Sankara brought Upper Volta to the Burkina Faso that we are talking about. Already, Burkina Faso is talking about value added in their gold exports. So they are having rules that basically say that no raw gold will be exported. It must have value added right on the mining side before it is exported. And they are looking for that technology transfer from states like Russia who have the knowledge and the capacity to help them to do so. The point I'm making there is, do not look at Burkina Faso as we understand it today. My good name has talked about the potentials of Niger already. The point here also that must be noted, when the parliamentary elections in Mali were rigged and the results of opposition candidates were just simply cancelled to favor the ruling candidates, and ECOWAS kept quiet, that bad governance is what has triggered gradually the deterioration of our collective political effort enshrined in our own treaties and protocols. And so we are now at a stage where that has accelerated. And the Senegal example, Evans, if I were to conclude there, rather than the language that is absolutely non-acceptable to the behavior of President Macky Sall, who himself was an ECOWAS chair before, Name has described the language that was rather enforcing what has happened. And I want to conclude on this note with that example. If you look at Section 2 of our Protocol on Democracy and Good Governance, you look at Article 1, it's very clear. 6 months to an election, you cannot modify any electoral law that goes into the election. In Senegal, we're talking about weeks, we're not talking about months. So why can't we be fidel? Why can't there be fidelity to our instrument?
To the rules that we set ourselves. I mean,
that's the point.
Ms. Afol,
that's the point.
Ms. Afol, let me hear your take on that.
You see, I wanted us, because of what the topic tonight, the implications.
Yeah.
You see, the modern definition of democracy is that it must be connected to the good standard of living or the economic good standard of the people. Any democracy that does not have that is just not in the right position. Number two, the 3 states that broke away have various reasons why they did. Guinea has not even come out to explain fully why they moved away. At least we know that of Burkina Faso one way or the other. Burkina Faso was struggling with the jihadists. We know one of the Malians, they also struggle with the jihadists, especially the large population of the Fulanese. And one of the things that is affecting ECOWAS, and not ECOWAS alone, is that our current military are not really trained to really meet the current demand and taxes that they are facing. And so Ghana is also out of the woods yet, but we are lucky because we have a small population of the Fulanese who stretch very wide and cut across everywhere. Remember, Guinea had the only issue that Guinea was struggling with exactly what we are seeing in Senegal in terms of certain political decisions, relations, what have you. So we really need to look at also, if we take Ghana as for the mirror, Ghana needs to look at some of the internal discrepancies, internal wranglings, internal difficulties that these are facing, because it is these internal issues that pop up and shoot up and move others towards everywhere. The other thing we have to also look at is that I heard, I think Professor Eni made a very good point. One of the things we have to understand is that trade actually is well developed based upon comparative advantage. And I'm insisting that these three countries will find it difficult in the long term to really survive. Why? Because if intra-African trade is built on comparative advantage, apart from comparative advantage...
Are you suggesting that the rest of ECOWAS hold the comparative advantage?
I all believe it by comparative advantage. And secondly, we must have a very strong import substitution policies. For example, you will ask yourself, I heard uranium and all this is in Niger, but up till now, why has it not been developed? It's the one thing having those resources, it's another thing developing, it's another thing putting value.
And now it's possible that now that they've now broken away and they can possibly now come under the sphere of influence of China and mainly Russia.
That is what we have been experiencing all this while. We always have the fantastic policies. But implementation is years away.
Let me quickly bring in Ziad, and I quickly want to take a break on this. But the fundamental question for me, Ziad, and I'll start you off. When I return, I'll get a take off everyone else around the table, is can the rest of the sub-region afford to bid good riddance to the three? In other words, can we say, yeah, take your three countries and form a bloc, and we are fine, and leave them to be? Can we afford that? Or the implications for the rest of us, trade-wise, economic-wise, could be dire, and we need them necessarily to be part of the bloc?
The short answer is no. We cannot afford to have an erosion of our democratic gains in West Africa. ECOWAS has worked really hard to bring these countries all together. They might have worked very slowly, and I agree with Emmanuel that yes, the political leadership is very important and that there were some faux pas. I think personally that the camel that broke the straw, the straw that broke the camel's back was when President Tinubu, as chairman of ECOWAS, had issued a threat of military invasion to Niger. Mm-hmm. And then that is when Niger closed its borders and realized that ECOWAS is not going to propose any solution that will solve its problems. I have to tell you one thing, because we discuss among ourselves within West Africa, it seems that within the landlocked countries, they are happier with the turn of events ever since they've started to manage their own affairs independently.
Why? Ziad, why? Why is that?
Because they are tackling the issues of the day-to-day activities, they are tackling the terrorism, and they are getting and they are throwing out the former colonial masters. There are so many issues that are taking place. And
in other words, they are discovering that they are better off without ECOWAS than with ECOWAS.
In the shorter term, yes.
Okay.
But then once the economic situation in the longer term starts to kick in, they will realize that politics is all about compromise. And that eventually an ECOWAS of the people is in charge of looking at the interests of not only its people, but also the people of the region, because collectively we're stronger. It is true that the three countries are stronger than one country, but also 15 countries are much more stronger than one. And eventually, a good ECOWAS leadership will lead the way towards integration. A bad ECOWAS leadership will lead us towards disintegration. So we should take our cues, and we should urge our leaders to sit at the table, to solve this issue, to look at the root cause that is causing countries to disenfranchise from ECOWAS. I've learned that tomorrow is a summit, an extraordinary meeting that is taking place at the ECOWAS head office. I hope that they come up with some decisions. I'll remind you that late last year, there was a heads of state meeting where there was some conversation at the highest level. There was some attempts to discuss how ECOWAS can climb down from the issuance of threats towards Niger in order to work on a solution that is more acceptable to ECOWAS and at the same time, so to say, saves the face of the ECOWAS leadership. They're yet to get there, but I think it's very urgent that we come back to the root cause of disenfranchisement and we solve it. It's not politics, it's not security, it's economic development. And ECOWAS is there for the fulfillment of the will of the people, and the leaders should give the leadership necessary to bring their people together. That's what I would like to add.
I want to take a quick break. We want to return. So, what should ECOWAS do now that they three have announced a breakaway? My guests will weigh in after this. And thanks for staying with us here on PM Express, a conversation about the breakup of ECOWAS, as we're seeing three countries declaring that they really are happier staying out of ECOWAS than being part of ECOWAS. And we're talking about that because we've just been analyzing the implications of this breakup of ECOWAS for you and myself. We've talked about the trade question, but also the security question. And my guests have been helping us look at this matter. As you know, PMS is always brought to you by Syntax Tanks. It is strong, it is tough. Alamobitas experience greatness in every moment. The Ghana AIDS Commission, Pepsodent, every smile matters. And I always recommend the Syntax Tanks to you. Syntax Tanks is the first to introduce a double layer tank. And now you can have as many layers as you want because they really have the bespoke offerings for you as well. And they have the warranty, 7 years. Nobody else has that on the market. Call them on 0244 335 168 or shop online at syntexgh.com. Syntax Tanks, you're stronger, you're tough. Now, Pepsodent Cavity Fighter is fortified with the Pro Fluoride and microcalcium ingredients, sealing tiny and invisible holes in your teeth. Now, this prevents cavities, keeps your teeth strong and mouth healthy. Pepsodent Cavity comes in 175-gram big family pack, 120-gram Ejakwa pack, and a 65-gram and 12-gram sachet. So you can't always get what you can afford at any time. Don't just use toothpaste to brush your teeth. Use Pepsodent. Pepsodent, every smile matters. My guests who've been with me analyzing these very complex matters, but also matters that are of grave importance to us all, is Professor Kwesi Yenim, who has been giving us his own assessment, the security consultant and risk assessment. We also have Yao Louis Afo, also joined us with his thoughts, international trade practitioner and group executive, also joining us with his thoughts on the subject. Ziad Hamwi is the national president of the Ghana Borderless Alliance, and Emmanuel Bombande is a former deputy foreign affairs minister and senior mediator, also joining us with his thoughts also. Now, Professor Yenim, I need to ask you that fundamental question. So where we are right now, the countries have already announced their intentions. Can we afford, when I say we, I mean ECOWAS, can ECOWAS afford to bid them good riddance?
It's important for ECOWAS's own self-preservation, the 50-year investment we've put into it, but also the fact that as Africans, we can make an integration project work. And we've been very successful in the security cooperation side. We've been very successful in creating a sense of ECOWASness. We need to be proud of our passport that gives us a common right to travel and to stay in the country for 90 days visa-free. I think there are some conversations to extend it. There are conversations to reconcile the curricula so that if you take a medical degree in Niamey, you can practice in Ghana. So there are lots of positive things that we need to highlight. So it's for our own self-perception and our identity. We cannot let them go. But it is slipping out of our hands because of poor, uninformed leadership and bellicose language.
So what do we do now?
What we need to do I think my name said it is about dialogue and preventive diplomacy, but I would say actually that hybrid diplomacy. We know that the former emir of Kano, Sanusi, was the one who, through backdoor channels, opened the doors for some kind of contact. So we need to use every tool in that instrument box. That is very key. But we also need to watch our language. Dismissive, bellicose, intimidating, dismissive. No sovereign country that respects itself will tolerate that. And as Ghanaians, we remember when Mr. Rawlings's revolution was dismissed and he and his team were hounded and disrespected. It brought us as Ghanaians together, one way or the other. Okay, so we should let history guide us. Finally, and I think this is something that my friends are agreeing with me very strongly, I think the Accra Initiative gives us yet another opening that real diplomacy, skillful diplomacy, can help open yet another channel for conversation. Because Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, together with Ghana, Togo, and Cote d'Ivoire, Benin, are part of the Accra Initiative with Nigeria as an observer. There is some mistrust, particularly from the Burkinabes, because we made that diplomatic faux pas in telling other people that the Wagner Group was in Burkina. Mali and Niger are watching and are not too sure whether they can trust us 100%. But I think we have the skillful diplomats who can use the Accra Initiative as a vehicle to start a conversation. But to be successful, the leadership and initiative must come from ECOWAS. The three countries, as my colleagues have said, have nothing to lose. They have absolutely everything to gain, and already the strategic games are being played and they are being courted like very beautiful brides.
Yeah.
So ECOWAS has been coming.
And Mr. Bombande, if you may bullet it for me, is it too late for dialogue and diplomacy to fix this problem?
I wouldn't describe it as too late. I'll fall back on what Professor Enin just said. The diplomacy now needs to be elevated, but have a vertical capacity in which the authority of heads of state are engaging, but then the engagement is also happening at different levels. For that to happen, we need to take this matter as seriously as it presents itself. Why? Because we want to bring back solidarity in West Africa. And that is why I agree with Zahid and all my colleagues on the panel. It's not because there are three Sahelian states. If they leave, and if we sit by and they leave, we would have lost something of us. And that is the presentation that Professor Enin is saying we need to uphold. We cannot allow our brothers and sisters from those three countries to desert us. That's one. But as we said, maybe very quickly, I should give the example. If you recall, Evans, December 2016, January 2017, Yahya Jammeh was uncompromising. The level of diplomacy involved 4 heads of state, President Buhari, Baikoroma, Johnson Sirleaf, President John Mahama, together traveling to Banjul and sitting with him and trying to persuade him to see reason to leave. It worked.
Yeah.
So a lot that the current chair, President Tinubu, will do matters a lot.
Okay.
And since I don't have another minute, let me just end by saying what we should not be doing and we should not do at all. I heard my good brother Luis talk about Fulani. Fulani is not a problem in West Africa.
Yeah.
Let us not make that mistake. Because you see, Thomas Sankara was a Fulani. Because when we begin to ethnicize our politics, we will be going completely in the wrong direction.
Yeah.
What we need is to look at the citizens.
Let me give a quick word to Ziad. Ziad, you have the final word. And if you don't mind, so summarize for me, for these three countries, what is it that they really want, briefly? What is it? Is it that they want ECOWAS to recognize them and withdraw the sanctions and just accept that they did a coup and they'll sort of return to democratic rule in their own time. What is it that they want? If you figure out what they want, how does ECOWAS go about giving that to them? Very briefly.
Very briefly, 3 countries, I think 3 main requests: respect, dignity, and opportunity. And you need to restart the engagement from the ECOWAS leadership in order to show these countries that they care for them and that they matter to them, to us as ECOWAS citizens.
Okay.
Because, as my brother said, they are our brothers and sisters. You can't just let them walk away and feel badly treated. Something has to give.
Okay. Thank you very much, gentlemen. There's a lot to chew on there, and ECOWAS really has a lot of work to do. The ball is in its court, as you've heard. We'll return to this conversation definitely as the geopolitical conversations continue. Enjoy the rest of your evening.